Hello. Dave, can you hear me? Your mic is muted.
There we go.
There you go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our next panel, Classical Animation and Why. Thank you two for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourselves, introduce yourselves, and tell us a little bit about what this panel is going to be about?
Absolutely. Dave Pruiksma and I both worked in feature animation, and I worked in television animation well for many years at Warner Brothers and Disney, we got into animation education about 10 years ago, and found out we really enjoyed that, and we're now starting a new venture of classical animation training, cat animation, and are looking forward to passing on what we've learned to a new generation. So Dave, you want to supplement that with your background as well?
Okay, well, my name's Dave Pruiksma. I'm a longtime animator. I started working at Disney about 40 years ago. And I was a supervising animator at the time. I worked on all the modern Golden Age classics, so-called classics. And you probably know my characters better than me, Mrs. Potts and Chip and Victor and Hugo and Flit and Flounder and a bunch of other characters that I worked on over the 20 years I was at Disney. When I got there, a lot of the surviving 9 old men were still there, and we were trained under Eric Larson. So we got a lot of that foundational training passed down to us by the surviving 9 old men before they really retired and then eventually passed away. So we got a very strong foundation and got to work on a new generation's series of films. One of the great joys of my life. It was kind of a surprise, a blessing, and a wonderful time we all had making those films. And I retired when that kind of waned and got a little bit bored, and decided to go into education and pass down what they taught to us to a new generation, so that they could keep that flame going. And that's what cat animation is all about.
Well, we got our first question in here. Where do you both see the future of cat heading within this decade? Well, I guess what we feel is that the principles of animation haven't changed. It just might be a different medium that we're using them in. So the principles of performance and good acting and communicating emotions aren't going to be dictated by software. Companies can be hiring you for the knowledge that's in here, and whatever medium you end up applying that to is great. So we still want to teach those principles, whether it's working traditionally or digitally, and we find that can apply to whatever people are doing. And we think animation itself is a really great way to kind of inform everything you do, whether you're interested in being an animator in particular, or if you're interested in being a storyboard artist, a character designer. That experience in animation can inform all of those disciplines.
Absolutely. To me, it doesn't matter whether you pick up a pencil, a stylus, a piece of clay, an animated jointed puppet. It's all about what you're communicating and how you're performing and how you're entertaining with the medium. I think that's probably first and foremost what we're taught to us. It's not about flamboyance, it's about communication and heart and believability. And those are the skills that we really focus on.
So our next question is, what's your advice on an authentic performance / acting? That's a good question. I think, there's a tendency sometimes when you're a young animator, you want to do the really flashy scenes, the ones that really stand out. But what I found is what really connects with people is when you can get across an emotion that people say, I've really felt that way. I empathize with that character. I know I felt that way. I felt alone, or I felt, similar to how that character's feeling, or in an aspirational level, I wish I could be like that character. I wish I could be, taking that step. And that to me is where you really connect with the audience, is when they can recognize something of themselves, either something they'd love to be or they felt like in the character. And I think part of that also is really what we stress in terms of performance is making unique acting choices that are specific to that character at that moment of time. So we're not picking like a generic gesture that we've seen before, a generic facial expression we've seen. We're trying to find out, how does that particular character say that line? Is it out of the side of their mouth, or is it, what can we use about their secondary actions, their nonverbals, like nervous, or they touching their neck, all of those things that can communicate. And that all starts with observation too, being able to really observe what people are doing. I have my little file of things like bad child behavior that I've observed, kind of notes and things. Oh, I saw that in a restaurant. That's going to come in and help.
Yeah.
Dave, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I always thought about animation as being more acting than anything else. So it really doesn't matter what medium you work in. It's really about that performance and about, getting inside the character's head and really trying to understand what makes that character unique and makes it react in a unique way. So as an animator, as a supervising animator, when I come in and start developing a character for a story, I work with the art director and with the directors, and we kind of get an idea of what their role is in the film. And then we start talking about influences. And sometimes my characters are an amalgam of many different performances or people in my life, including a little bit of me, that I bring together to create a new personality. Once I have that, then when I get a layout and a scene and I know what the scene is supposed to communicate and how it fits into the scenes around me, then I look around the layout and I go, well, are there any props here that would work with the character, that would be interesting but not necessarily distracting? And I start blocking out the scene that way. And then once I get my ideas and thoughts down, I go back to the directors and I say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And they'll say, oh, I like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and throw in an armpit fart here and there. And the next thing you know, we've got the scene blocked out, and I can go forth with confidence and then do the drawing and the detail things. But first and foremost, it was really about understanding the character and bringing something very unique to it, personal.
There's another question about tips for developing our skills, and I guess that can also tie into that too. I think my initial early efforts when I was in college and stuff were very flashy, and I was afraid sometimes to kind of dig deep into real emotions. It's kind of scary to do that, and I think as I really thought back to maybe how I felt at a particular time, I became better at communicating that. So I think in terms of acting and being able to develop your skills, really, again, thinking about who that character is and what makes them unique, not just using, poses that we've seen before, really trying to find the little quirks and personalities of who that character is can be really helpful. And not being afraid to put a little of yourself on the screen. Sometimes, it's oh boy, I know I felt, shy or that way, and I can get that into the character. Other times, if it's a character like Hades, I was lucky enough to work with Nick Granieri on that character in Hercules. That channeled that snarky side of myself, which normally I'm not going to be that way to someone, but you're always, sometimes you're thinking that, like, I wish I could just say that in that really sarcastic, nasty way. Sometimes that was a way to get out that other side of that personality that is not really necessarily who you are, but you can find that in yourself. Boy, I felt like that sometimes.
Yeah, it's very cathartic to do that, in the performance. A lot of times you'll be cast against type, like a character like Packard. When I was cast on her, it's like, okay, what am I going to do with this? But I loved it because it was an opportunity to be somebody else and to actually have that cigarette and we're all gonna die. I loved that aspect of it, and it really threw me a curve and made me really think about what it was I wanted to communicate and how I could be that person.
I'm just answering the question about your Elvis clock in the background there.
My Elvis clock. Oh, well, actually, that's on the wall over here. You're seeing it in the mirror. It's great. His hips move back and forth as the pendulum, and he keeps a very good time.
So there was another question here. Do you think CG will ever be able to replicate the look of 2D convincingly?
That's a good question.
And I guess, go ahead, Dave,
Well, my question is, does it need to? Why, I've always thought whenever, these different mediums came on, why did it have to be either or why does one have to influence the other? It's an art form and they're different mediums doing the same thing. So, I don't see anything wrong with experimenting with technology and seeing how that can support storytelling and performance. But I don't know that one has to replicate or particularly, emulate the other. There's always been, paper cutout animation. There's been cell animation. There's been stop motion animation for as long as animation's been around. And there's always been a place for all of those. And, I've heard it said many times before, but sometimes it's what's appropriate to the story or the characters, and then making an aesthetic choice based on that. So that's kind of my feel about it. I do like hybrid the way they use technology to create a hybrid look. Like, for instance, I thought Klaus was really striking looking and really exciting to me because it had all of the groundwork and foundation of traditional animation. In fact, much of it was done on paper. Very little was done digitally. Some was, but most of it was actually done traditionally on paper. And then they brought that technology and augmented the drawings and the performances with this beautiful, beautiful art direction and look. And that's really where I see technology really working. I mean, I think back to when we were switching over from cells to caps at Disney, and on Little Mermaid was the last feature to be done on cells. And I remember when they were talking about doing the painting on a computer, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. It's always been done on cells. We've always had little hand inked bubbles and hand inked characters and Xerox and whatnot. It's like it can't be done. And then right after we did Rescuers Down Under, I looked at it and I looked back at the cells and I go, I can't even imagine hand inking and painting and Xeroxing all those cells, all those levels. It just seemed archaic to me. And what the technology did was it didn't so much change the stories or the characters or the approach. What it changed was the look, and it created an environment where we could do things that we hadn't been able to do because of cost prohibitions in years, like multiplaying in almost every shot and modeling on the characters. And I remember when we were working on Mickey's Christmas Carol, there were meetings and discussions for weeks about should we airbrush the giant's big eyeball or should we just leave it flat? Because it was expensive and time consuming to do that. Whereas today it's like, okay, you want it rendered? Push a button and there it is. And that's what I think the beauty of the technology is. It helps in the right hands using the head rather than just look what the technology can do. It's like using it in an artistic and creative way, I think is very exciting. And I like what I see happening.
Well, building on that too, I think early on there was a push in CG to let's see how realistic we can get, how realistic can we make these textures and all that. And I think people realize that's not the direction that you want to go with animation. Let's make it interesting and stylized. And someone here brought up Spider-Man. How cool was that? You had the CG, but also there was a feeling of how it had worked. That inspiration from drawn animation as well. And that's a great way that one can inform the other. And yeah, I think both can exist absolutely side by side. Which someone asked in chat, do you think traditional 2D animation will ever make a big comeback in movies? Well, I don't think it'll be necessarily in movies and movie theaters, but I think streaming services, particularly like Netflix, have made a great commitment to animation and diverse styles of animation, which is really cool. And I think that may be where we get future things. I often think, Cartoon Saloon is doing great stuff. I can't wait to see Wolf Walkers. And so I think there is a place. I think maybe not in the $250 million budget range, but I think a film like Klaus proves that you can make an amazing looking film for a very reasonable price. And I think that is compelling. And then it becomes less about, is it, what medium we're doing this in, but, is this the right medium for this story? And, it definitely shows that there is room for all of that. I mean, I would have thought, a while back that I don't see, stop motion really making this huge comeback. And there were all these wonderful films that were done in stop motion. And to me, that's the technology that scares me the most, because you just animate that scene straight ahead and you can't make mistakes and all that. But it's gorgeous in its own right. So I think all of these forms of animation can exist concurrently. And I'm very hopeful for the future and what is going to be coming out and what we're going to see. And there was one question on how I muscled this Disney desk out of the building. Not easily. They're 350 pounds. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So you can't just tuck it under your coat, you know?
yeah, a lot of dollies and a lot of
Yeah.
backaches. So let's see what else we. Someone else, Pamela asked, "Do you recommend acting classes?" And for me, they were very helpful because I was naturally very shy in high school, and I think maybe that's why I became an animator, because I didn't necessarily want to be in front of the camera, but rather behind it. And for me, that helped me to come out of my shell. And I don't think I'm a great actor on camera in live action, but the great thing about animation is there's no physicality involved in it. You can be a dragon, or you can be a raccoon, or you can be whatever you want. And removing those limitations for me is really exciting. You can play so many different roles. So I think that was helpful to take the acting classes, just for me personally, to kind of gain that confidence, and that does inform what I did. And I think in conjunction with that, looking at films, studying what actors do, can really be exciting in terms of getting ideas for what you want to do. Not to emulate them, but to see what they're doing that's different, or what makes a scene really interesting when a particular actor brings to that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm looking at a question that says, any tips to develop our skills when we're just starting out? That's a good question, because a lot of people, they just, they know what they want to do, but they don't really know how to get started. And, we've talked a little bit about performance, but we haven't really talked much about passion. Animation is a very competitive and difficult medium to work in. It is very challenging because you're an actor, you have to understand timing, you have to understand all the many different things, filmmaking and whatnot, and it can be overwhelming. What I suggest is that you kind of try it. Do a little bit of animation. It doesn't matter. I mean, I used to do little flip books back in the 60s, and just like, hey, this is kind of fun. I kind of like it. And, then I started developing those skills a little bit further by just starting to make my own little films and things like that. Nobody has to see it. It can just be kind of your thing, or you can show it to people you trust and say, what do you think? And just kind of get an idea if it's really what you want to do, because it does seem like fun, and it is a lot of fun, and it's very rewarding. But I don't think people ever think that someone sits down and says, okay, we're going to do Pinocchio. We're going to start at drawing 1, and we're going to start at, finish at drawing 6 million. There's a whole lot of changing and rearranging and rethinking things. It's not so much a linear thing. So when you're starting out, you want to make sure that you really have the passion and the drive to do the work. Once you know you've got that, then you need to find classes in gestural drawing, and in caricature, and in design, and in performance, they're all gonna kind of dovetail into each other and help support all of the skills that you need to then bring that performance to the screen. What you're ultimately trying to do in educating yourself is to get all those skills here, so that you can get what's in your head down on the paper, or down on the tablet, or in clay, or in the puppet, or whatever you're using, because those are all tools to get a performance on the screen. So you really need to start slowly developing the skills, and don't expect it to happen overnight. It takes years of study and practice. Even after you're animating and you're good at it, you're still learning and growing. I mean, I find myself not being able to turn it off now as I'm older. And when I'm out, I see an interesting walk, or I see an interesting personality, and I make mental notes of it in my head. It's constant observation and development and application of those things.
I think you make a good point, Dave. As far as where you study animation, there are different modes that are good for different people. Some people flourish in a one-on-one mentoring environment. Some people appreciate the input and excitement of working in a group. But what you always need to bring to the table, whatever path you choose, is your passion, your persistence, and your practice. That is what's going to make your work stand out. In other words, I don't think we always are concerned as artists, oh, is my draftsmanship good enough? I don't draw like Milt Kahl, but and very few people do, but I think, if as long as you're willing to put in the effort and practice, those things will come in time. I think, our society now, expects everything to be there, right, ready to go. And when we work with students, most often we find, that it's hard for them to see their progression over time, because it's a longer time frame, but we can certainly see that. So that's what I would encourage everyone. It's you have to break through that frustration. I want it now. I want it to be really good now, but this is always a process. We're always going to be improving throughout your whole career. You're going to be getting better, and you have to also enjoy where you are at this period in time too. Let's see what we've got. A bunch of, and yes, someone commented on Space Jam 2. A lot of that being in drawn animation as well. Yeah, they're using some combination of CG and I think 30 minutes of hand-drawn animation there, which is really cool to see that. So yeah, there are opportunities, and I hope that the industry will grow. Just in that there's so many areas of storytelling that we haven't explored, I think, in animation. I would love to see more horror movies, animation, things like that. As Brad Bird says, animation isn't a genre. It can do all of these different kinds of stories. And I think we've just, kind of scratched the surface in some of that. And in the sense that sometimes animation has been viewed, at least in the US, as more of a kid's medium, but it's not. It certainly can appeal and connect with adults very well. So
no, and I think other countries have really proven that with a lot of more adult-themed animation and whatnot. And I think more and more you're seeing them tackle topics that you wouldn't normally tackle in animation. I mean, it's not so much about squirrels and puppies and kittens like hitting themselves on the head with mallets anymore. It's gone well beyond that. Yeah. Although I still like that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's a question here from Jason. He says, are there any pros and cons between working either the A or B studios at Disney? By the A and B studios at Disney, I'm not sure exactly what you meant by that. Or do you mean the advantage of working in a larger studio versus a smaller studio? Because I think what I found with a lot of our students is they'll say, hey, I'm really passionate about, say, visual development, but they may not get that opportunity at a larger studio. But working at a smaller studio, they can wear a number of different hats as long as they have, a varied skill set to be able to do that. Oh, so Jason clarifies in terms of location. Yeah, I think, there were some films that like Lilo and Stitch done in Florida, which I think maybe had not as much oversight, and to me turned out to be a wonderful, entertaining film. So I don't know. Sometimes, Dave, you can speak to the whole idea of getting kicked off the lot in the 80s, and and you think, oh boy, I'm out of the animation building. But then that's when some of the best films were done, kind of off on Flower Street over there.
Yep, so. Yep. Yeah, we're kind of a ragtag team at that time, it kind of cast out, and it was just like, oh, am I furious? And then we gathered up our strength, and we decided, okay, we're gonna do our best. We're gonna give it our best shot. And fortunately, the film started making money, and one dovetailed onto another, and before you knew it, Mermaid happened, and Roger Rabbit happened, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, this really has potential. Audiences are raising their eyebrows and going, hey, there's something here. But I don't think you would have known that in the late 70s and early 80s when I was first starting. I think you just had to kind of ride it out and see what the future holds. I don't think we knew what was around the corner, but it sure was exciting when it finally exposed itself.
Ivan has a good question here. You spoke about being passionate in your animation. How does one be able to keep that passion as time goes on and avoid losing it? How would you?
That's a great question.
Practically avoid or work through burnout.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts on that, but go ahead, Dave, if you want to talk.
Well, one of the things that we need to understand about animation from an animator's perspective is animation per se takes so long to do. It's like incremental. Watching an animator animate is almost like akin to watching ice melt. It happens slowly, but it's dramatic if you speed it up. But the point is, it's a difficult thing because you have material that is given to you fresh, but if you work on it for days, weeks, and months, it seems less fresh. It's akin to an actor walking out on stage and playing to a dark, empty audience. You're making all the lines, you're doing all the things, but no one's reacting yet. And it's not, you have to kind of stave yourself up against that and just keep going forward and making it better and better and improving it to be as clear and as best as you can. And then when you finally get that real audience in a theater and you sit there and you watch them reacting correctly and in the right place, that's the rush. You finally get that, but it's not an immediate thing. I mean, there's an immediacy in the world today. People, I see students, they'll do a bouncing ball test and they'll immediately put it on YouTube for feedback. It's like, keep working at it until you get it exactly the way you want it, rather than asking for feedback on something. It's okay to ask for feedback while stuff's in progress, but then you take that in and you sort of incorporate that into your process. And then you kind of take what works for you and cast off what doesn't. And you develop these skills. And then all of a sudden, you're getting this reward. You're seeing that the stuff that you're trying over and over is starting to develop into something really exciting that you're starting to use more and more and develop more and more with each progressive scene you do. It's not like starting over at square one with every scene. You're bringing the skills that you're developing forward into the next scene, and then you're adding more skills to that.
I think hand in hand with that, avoiding the burnout, is I recommend that you always have something that is yours, that you are doing outside of your studio job.
Yep.
And it can be a web comic. It can be just one drawing you did, at dinner that day that you like, or, it can be a character design. For me, something that you control entirely really is the bulwark against that burnout. Because, if you invest all your happiness in the day job, sometimes the day job goes down and sometimes it goes up. And, and you can't be completely emotionally totally invested in that, because it will have its ups and downs, and it will have, oh, I did this great scene and it got cut, and there's that, or my storyboard got thrown out because they decided to go another direction. And it's sometimes it's not because you did anything wrong, it's just because that's the greater needs of the film.
Exactly.
So I think when you have something that you're doing for yourself, that helps, you to say, well, maybe I had a crummy day at work today, but, I really did this little character that I like. So I think to me, that's really important, to keep that, some creative level that you have complete control over going on in the background.
Yeah, I think that Ward Kimball is kind of the poster child for that. He working on Snow White. He'd do one sequence, the bed building sequence or something like that, and that would get cut. And then he'd do the soup eating sequence, and that would get cut. It's like, but he always, when I looked at Ward, he did great animation, but he always had hobbies and things going on the side. He was a real eccentric and a real true artist. And I love seeing his private work as well as the work that he did on the films.
Let's see, we've got some other good questions here.
Here's one I think might be good, Dave.
Okay.
Since you said it depends on what the story needs regarding 2D or 3D, do you think 3D is being overused nowadays? Like there would be some movies made in 3D that would benefit by being done in 2D. That's hard to say. That's a studio choice. You have to understand that at the big studios, it's pretty hard to stop a speeding locomotive and change directions. You have to, once the pipeline is set up and the people are there and things are moving forward, it's very difficult to switch back and forth. I think where you see a lot of innovation taking place in animation right now and in the flexibility to work in different ways is in the streaming area. The studios like Netflix and Apple and places like that they have the ability to have different studios producing different things in different mediums. So I guess the trend towards 3D is probably most importantly because that's what the studios are set up to do now. They've kind of broken down the old system of working traditionally in animation, whether it's digitally or on paper.
That's why I have this desk.
What's that?
That's why I have this desk.
Yes, you got to be prepared for whatever comes along. And I think that's the thing. That's why our focus isn't on any specific medium or whatnot. It's really about being as well prepared for what you'll be called upon to do in your career, and not being able to say, well, I can do this, but I can't do that. Our goal in what we teach is to teach at the very highest level, so you're ready for whatever comes along. So if something else comes along, you're still able to apply those skills in other areas. But if, let's say, Mary Poppins Returns, the hand-drawn animation that was done at Duncan Studios for that, our students got jobs on that film because they were the only students coming out of art schools and animation schools that really understood full animation. They knew how to read an X sheet. They understood layouts. They understood all of those things. And they were ready and available for those kinds of jobs. And then they went over and they started working on the new Space Jam and other things. You know, you just have to reach for as high as you personally can possibly get, so that you have so you're developed as far as you can go. And that way you never know what the future holds. Like I said before, you know, we didn't know Little Mermaid and all of the classic films that we did were on the horizon, but when it got there, we were ready because of what we learned.
I'm going to triangulate a couple questions here. One was, how
Okay.
often do you guys use digital programs such as TV Paint? And you see my desk here. You're not seeing my Cintiq, which is over here. And I've got some brushes I love in TV Paint now. But you know, it's to me, it's all about the drawing skill. As soon as you can replicate, you know, the feel on a tablet, doesn't matter to me what medium I'm working on. Once I found brushes that, you know, okay, I can get a blunt pencil. I love drawing with a blunt pencil. And I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. I can make it look like, you know, I would do it on paper. And I'm going to tie that into a question here. Someone says, I'm just starting to learn. My question is, do I start with pencil, paper, or computer? And I think, you know, it doesn't matter. It's nice to me. A pencil and paper is the most basic thing. You know, you can just put down these drawings and make the move. Yeah, you need something to shoot it with. But you know, other people say, well, I've you know, worked digitally. I'm comfortable doing that. I think that's fine, as long as you can get the sensitivity in your digital drawings that you can on paper. I notice a lot of people, when they would jump to digital, they would just use like not a pressure sensitive line, and it would just kind of be like, you know, like it was drawn with a marker or something. And I think that worked against them. But then I've also seen people who really, they got a brush that they liked and they could kind of get that finesse in there too. So I don't think it's as crucial. What you can get, you know, something like Rough Animator for $5, and that's a digital, you know, drawing program, and run with that, and that's perfectly fine. And you can play back stuff and see it. It's, to me, it's more about the thinking that goes into it more than the medium. You know, at CAT, we teach both traditional and digital, whatever format the student wants to work in. That ties into another question that we had here. What separates CAT animation from other training programs? Well, to me, I think it's more, we've always seen it as a mentoring opportunity. So we'll have, if someone prefers to work one-on-one, we'll do that, because that works. You know, we love that, being able, and that works for some people who just don't want to work in you know, a group environment, and we can move at their pace. We can identify their strengths and areas that their challenges in, and kind of gear exercises towards that. But we also keep our classes really small. I don't really ever want to have more than 12 people in a class, because I want to give them personal attention. You know, even though we're working remotely, we'd love to have a, you know, after we get through the pandemic, a physical location where we could just sit down. That was always the most fun, just sit down and draw over someone's drawing really quickly, and being able to help them. And that was great too. So I guess what distinguishes us is we really want to teach full animation and all those principles, and that's independent of media, whether it's digital or hand drawn, because that will inform whatever you do. If you're working in limited animation, if you've done full animation with all its subtleties, you can work really smart in limited animation. You know exactly what to leave out or what to give it that fluidity when you need to.
Yes, exactly.
Do you want to bounce off of that too?
Well, I was looking at a question that I find really interesting too, and that is, who were your mentors when you first started working for Disney, and what did you gain most from them? Um, I think for me, well, first of all, when we started there, everybody went through Eric Larson. He had been there for years, and he was the trainer, and he had stayed on well beyond when everyone else was retiring, and taught a training program. So most of my generation, at least 100 to or more people who came into the studio, were immediately put into an upstairs office with Eric Larson, and you would do tests, experiments in animation, and you would study drawing and gestural drawing and whatnot with Walt Stanchfield and people like that. And then Eric would go over your tests and he'd gently advise you. And I was so impressed with his patience and his kindness and his lack of ego. He would just kind of gently go over. He'd say, "No, this is just a diagram," and he'd just like do a little oval over your head and create a tilt. And there was no reverence to it has to be perfect. It was just like it was all about process. And what I loved about Eric was I'd sit there looking over his shoulder and he would take the paper and he'd go, "No, that's not quite right." And he'd just like take it on the pegs and go rip and tilt it and then tape it down. And he'd be like, you'd be behind him going, "You can't do that." But he did whatever it took. He was very pragmatic in getting what he needed on the screen. And that's what I really loved about him. Also, the old guys were still around. Frank and I were writing their book. So they were there a lot doing lectures and things like that. They were all still there and they were all still around, and you could approach them and talk to them if you weren't too shy. And I was a little shy at that time, but I did manage to have some great conversations with some of those wonderful people. They were very supportive and very encouraging and very forthcoming with advice. And the advice was always really down to earth and practical. It wasn't so much about you draw like me or you do this. It was about, it's like, well, what are you trying to do? And then they would give you advice based on their personal experience of, well, this is how you do it. It wasn't like they were trying to make you a mini them. What they were trying to do was reach inside of you and find out what it is who you were and what it is you were trying to communicate and draw that out. And that stuck with me. And that's why in all of my teaching and all of my mentoring and in what we're doing with our school, CAT Animation, is that very thing. Working with people where they are, finding out what they want to do, what they want to communicate, and then helping them to do that using the skills that were given to us. And that sometimes means repetition. It sometimes means going over it. It sometimes means making mistakes, but that's okay. Because the bottom line and what we tell our students is you have to trust the process. And that seems to help people be able to move forward, is knowing that it's okay if I fall. These guys are here to help us, catch us and help us get up and keep going.
I think that's what really important too, because our society sort of breeds this idea that, here's this list of 100 fails and check out these fail videos and stuff. And there's this kind of built-in fear of failure, but learning anything difficult, whether it's a musical instrument or animation, is about making those mistakes. And I think we sometimes psych ourselves up nowadays and think, oh my gosh, this has to be perfect. I can't make any mistakes. Well, the thing is, yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but as long as you can learn from them and then apply those, then you haven't failed with that. Because you're not going to be perfect. I mean, you're not going to pick up a guitar and play like Jimmy Page first time or Clapton. There's going to be a lot of learning. So, what I look for in the students is never that they're going to make a perfect scene. There is no perfect scene. You could spend forever on a scene and never make it perfect, but you can say, oh, I really learned something from this. I'm going to remember that and I'm going to apply that next time. And that's, more important to your process than ever making any one particular scene perfect. There's been several questions about exercises here. Oh yeah, someone was asking if we have a website. I'm gonna pop that into the chat. there so you can check it out. We don't just have animation classes. Actually, one of our instructors, Larissa's in this discussion too. And Larissa is teaching an illustration class, and we have character design classes by wonderful people like Morgan Gill and John Perez is a wonderful story artist. So we have a lot of different options. I'm going to pop that in the chat there so you can check it out. Let's see. I did want to address a few of these. Someone said, I'm just starting to learn. Oh, we were talking about exercises too. I like people to work with their own characters. I think sometimes there's an advantage in your early exercises to working with an existing character. You have a model sheet, and you know it works dimensionally. Probably the hardest part of animation is stylizing the character so that you can draw it over and over and over. And sometimes that means I can't have 16 buttons on their outfit or something like that. But I think what I like about students working with their own characters is they can tell me, oh, this character would act this way in the certain situation, or this is what they're thinking, or this is what they're like. And that informs our exercises. So, someone mentioned, oh, do you do a head turn or something like that? I never would advise someone to do a scene that is just a mechanical scene, that is just a movement, because every scene you do should be with intention. And that's derived from who that character is. So if you're doing a head turn, think about what's the emotion that character's feeling before they turn their head. Is this a character who's really, very nervous and high strung? Well, that's going to completely inform the action that your character does. It's going to suggest to you secondary actions, which are emotions that help communicate. They don't, take over the main action you're seeing, but they help communicate who that character is. There's a wonderful scene in The Corpse Bride where Victor, who's going to be married to Victoria, is meeting her without a chaperone for the first time. And he's incredibly nervous, and he's got this kind of, little tie around his neck. And the animator did this wonderful thing where he's saying, we're to be married tomorrow. And he's almost strangling himself with this tie. It's so difficult for him. It was a wonderful bit of business. And if you look at his nonverbals too, he's touching his neck, which is an extremely low power pose that communicates non-verbally to people, I am really uncomfortable with this situation. So I would say whatever exercise you do, always invest it with character, even if it's just a walk. Don't do a standard walk that's in a textbook. Anyone can do that. That's why I love Dick Williams' book, The Animator Survival Kit, as he says, yeah, well, here's a walk, and then here's a million different ways that you can put variation on that. So make that walk move in terms of who your character is. Are they shuffling along pieces? They're nervous or worried. Invest that with an emotion.
That's where you start.
Yeah.
There's a question here that kind of it really touches me. It says, do you have any tips for people who are changing careers? I graduated from art school for illustration, but ended up in retail during the Great Recession. I have colleagues who say I should find mentorship. Others who say I need to just do a complete redo on my portfolio. Others who just want me to apply. Honestly, I don't even know where to begin. Boy, we've all been there. I mean, every time you start a new scene or a new picture, you start with a blank piece of paper or a blank screen, and where do you go? And you just have to start taking your first steps. I think for me, my advice to you is what is it that you really want to do with your drawing or your illustration or whatever? Because illustration and animation go hand in hand. If animation is something you're interested in, again, like I said before, try a little bit, see how you like it. There's a $5 program called Rough Animator you can use, and you can animate quickly on your phone or on your laptop and just see how you like it. It's $5, folks, and you can just try it out and see how you like it. Mentoring, I think, is very important. I think I learned more about animation. I learned a lot going to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. I learned a lot about drawing and film. And then I went to Cal Arts for a couple of years, and I learned a lot about animation and how to work in the animation industry as it pertained to Disney animation at that time. And I learned from some of the people who basically invented that. But where I really learned was being in the trenches at the studio and working with Eric and working with animators like Ed Gombert and Jay Jackson and Toby Shelton and and all of these wonderful animators that, I was able to do assistant work for, and I was able to see how they approached the scene. And all that really helped me, because if I had a question, I could go to them and they could explain why I was doing what I was doing. And that to me was the most important thing I needed to help me grow as an artist, by just giving me an assignment and letting me kind of do it for a while, and then going in and talking to them and having them gently guide me into how I could be better, and why I needed to do these certain things. I think that's really important. So I guess what I'm thinking is, I don't know if you should just apply unless you're sure what it is you want to apply for. I think that mentorship is great if you can get it. And that's one of the things that we do at Cat Animation, is not only do we teach classes, but if you feel like you're the type of person that would learn better through mentorship, you can set up a session, an hour session with Dave and myself personally on Zoom. We can go over your portfolio. We can talk about what your goals are and what your need is. And we can gently guide you into where you can get the steps you need to move forward. That may be working with us. And we can create specific exercises and things for you to do to help build your skills in certain areas. It's much more personalized kind of thing. So that may be something you want to look at. So I definitely suggest that you look at our site and see if some of the classes might help you, or whether personal mentoring might be the way you want to go.
And, I think, if it gives you confidence, we've had people who said, I got my degree in marine biology and I'm not doing that. I'm called to be an artist, and they've made that transition. Again, it's their passion that has really driven that. Yeah, I had another student who was going to study, be a microbiologist. And she's like, no, art is in me. I got to do that. So, and we have clients who are professional. We have one, personal mentoring client starting in January who's our age, and it's just like, hey, I felt like I missed out on something, never getting the opportunity to work, in classic drawn animation at Disney, but I'd like to, my skills are already good, but I'd like to improve them. So we work with people on that basis too. I learned myself by teaching myself, which is totally the worst way to go. I had no other option. I had like one other person who was even interested in animation in high school. Unfortunately didn't have a great art teacher. And so I took me so much longer to learn things than I would have learned if I could just have said, hey, how do I do this? I was actually going to film school, and because I wanted to learn about storytelling and working with actors and editing, but at the same time, I was just working on my animation, my drawings. And while I was in film school, I took my portfolio over to Bluth, and John Pomeroy was kind enough to look at it and say, yeah, he's all right, give him a test. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, yeah, you've done, in between cleanup tests before, right? I'm like, I said, well, I didn't lie. I hadn't done it professionally, but I had done it on my own. I'm like, yeah, well, when do you want me to bring it back? And they're like, no, go into this room and do it and come out in 2.5 hours. I'm like, so I did, and it must have been good enough. Jan Naylor looked at it and thought it was good enough that she was like, okay, we'll give you some cleanup work. So that was how I was paying for eating in college, was doing cleanup on various Don Bluth films. But my first professional opportunity was really difficult too. I ended up my first full-time job. I just had graduated from film school, and I didn't know if my work was good enough, and I took my portfolio to Warner Brothers, and it was like this stack of portfolios. In my mind's eye, it was like 10 feet tall. It was probably 12 or 15 in actuality. And I thought, oh, now we're going to get a job here. And so I just went in and started talking to people. I'm the production manager for Tiny Toons. That approach doesn't work at Disney, by the way. They escort you out under security, but blacks at Warner Brothers. And he said, well, we just lost someone to someplace called Pixar. They have a crazy idea. They're going to make a film with computers. That'll never work. He'll be back. And so I just happened to be there at the right time. And I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. That was very not like me, to just go around and sort of talk to people. So I encourage you to take advantage of opportunities like CTNX to meet other artists and to show them your work, have something good to show, and ask them, because the good things that happened to me were always when I pushed myself out of that comfort zone. And they looked at my stuff and said, if you can draw the Tasmanian Devil, we'll hire you. said, I will go home and get all my drawings of him. And I started drawing for the first time that weekend and brought him in for good enough. So that was, and then I got to work on Animaniacs there, but I still wanted to work in feature animation the whole time. So I kept working on like tests on my own and applied to Disney. And I think at that time you could only apply like every 6 months, you had to wait, if they turned you down. And so I applied, I was very bold and I applied as an animator, even though I probably wasn't, didn't have enough work behind me. And they gave me a test and I had to do the test, I think in a week, it was like a 10-second scene of Mickey. And they said, well, it was really good. We don't have anything right now though. I'm like, oh, okay. So 6 months later, I applied as an animating assistant, which is like an animator in training. And they called me back and said, oh, would you like to, come work for us? And I'm like, and they're like, we could offer you this. I'm like, yes. So I'll take that. They were like, oh, I'm sure they would have paid me a lot more, but I was just like, yeah, please, anything. And so, that was a matter of timing. It wasn't necessarily a talent thing. It was just like, here was an opening. I happened to get it at the right time. It gets easier as you go on. You meet people in the industry. They'll usually tell you, hey, there's a position over here. Get your stuff in so we can get it to the director. But those first few opportunities, I just had to do on my own.
I see.
That was a lot of me talking. I'm going to go back and check some.
Yeah, but good stuff. Good stuff.
Here.
I think sometimes people need to hear that, it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you really have to go out there and pound the pavement. Whether it's digitally these days on the internet or actually going physically to a place and talking to people. Dave, this is something that's interesting. Could you explain CAT animation, what separates it from other animation training programs? A lot of that is on the website, www.cat-animation.com. And it explains who we are, what our history is, and what our focus is. But just really quickly, we're a small company. We don't want to be big. We want to. It's kind of a niche market. We want to work with people who are very, very passionate and interested in what they do. We look at portfolios for everybody and try to place them where they'll get the most benefit. We keep the classes small and affordable, very affordable. And it's very personal. It's very student-centric rather than the bigger schools, which have a very different focus, where it's really kind of moving people through and processing people and handing them a paper at the end and saying, you've done this, get out. Our goal is to kind of create a personal relationship with our students and really understand who they are and what they want to do, and then gently guiding them. I think Dave and I have a very similar focus in what we want to do. And mostly it's about meeting people where they are and just like saying, okay, now we know what you want. Now we can create a program that works for you. And we will use the same exercises that we use in other areas, but we're always there for the person. Just because we have 2 classes a week where we critique and we lecture and whatnot, we're still there during the week to answer questions and to, do a drawing here and there or retime something and help you grow. And I'll be honest with you, since we've been doing this online classes, we've been kind of surprised at how quickly people grow, especially people who need a little extra time and a little extra care and a little extra love. And, we give them a lot of that personal attention, which I think nourishes them and helps them to grow much more quickly. So that's what CAT animation to me is all about.
Okay, I think we've got 7 more minutes. I want to touch on a few of these other questions. We have a lot of good questions. I'll try.
There's so many, I'm overwhelmed. But you can always go to our website and ask us personally. We have an info email there.
Yeah, we do have time to go over if we need to. Okay, no problem. I'm going to just put in, you can always reach us here, info@catanimation.com if you have a question or something like that. But let's see.
There's so many good ones. It's really hard to choose.
I'll take the one on shooting reference video. Yeah, I like to at least act out a scene. I don't tend to do tiny thumbnails. I tend to do more full-size thumbnails, but acting out a scene really helps me think about where the weight and balance is. And I'll film myself. You can get plenty of, free little apps that'll shoot it at 24 frames per second that you can take reference with, which is super helpful. When you get to something where you can't physically do it, like as much as I've tried, I can't fly like a dragon. So what I'll do is I'll go to animal reference and I'll look at, okay, how does like a really heavy bird fly? And I'll try to incorporate that. And that's, again, where believability comes in. We're never trying to do something that is realistic. Walt was always about, let's make it believable, but no matter how stylized it is. So things that we do will always be informed by that. Like I can do a cartoon dog run, but I couldn't do that unless I, study how a real dog runs first. So I think that's where that study of life drawing informs what you do. I had a long time making the connection between what are we doing with life drawing and how does that help animation. I realized gesture drawing really helped that because it was helping you boil down what that pose was, the essence of it. And it wasn't that you were going to duplicate that exactly in animation. You were going to expand upon that. You were going to throw away what was unnecessary and you were going to exaggerate what you really got out of that. So that's, and again, I had the lack of a formal art education. I was actually, after I got my undergraduate degree in film, I was going to go to Cal Arts. I had been accepted and was all set to go. That was the summer I started working at Warner Brothers full time. And my boss, Doug McCarthy, sat me down one day. He said, look, let me explain this to you. We're paying you to draw and you want to spend the next 4 years paying for the privilege of drawing. And I have to say he was right in that respect, that I learned a lot in the job environment. You will too. But it also, again, that lack of any formal mentoring meant I needed to take longer to learn things that I could have learned sooner with some guidance. So I do think there's an advantage, to having someone that can mentor. Definitely, I was craving it, and fortunately, I found that at the studios I worked. When Dave asked me to come do some work on Flit and Pocahontas, I remember him sitting down, and he must have had a whole pile of scenes to do, but he spent like an hour talking to me about how Flit's wings worked and how you would use the side of the pencil to get that on ones to get that variation vibration there. There was one area that was darker, which would show where the wing spent more time going through that. And I thought, this guy's a great teacher. And it turned out, actually it was true. He was willing to spend that time and effort in the midst of a busy production to do that. You also learn a lot from great directors too. Someone like Eric Goldberg is fantastic. Eric can look at your scene and he, like on one time through, he can know what it needs.
Oh God, yes.
Yes,
I.
it's kind of scary. Like, he'll be telling you change frame 23 and you're like, how did you see that? But yeah, actually, I've been fortunate enough to work with him on 2 different projects, and he's an animator and a wonderful director because he can speak your language as an animator.
He does.
Exactly what he needs. And working with like people like that brings out, stuff in you that you didn't think was possible. And working on a crew on a film does the same thing. There's always that terror at Disney that everything I draw is going to hang around long after I'm dead. So I better make a good job of it because I can't explain later on, well, I was feeling sick that week. I couldn't do my best with that scene. So I was kind of pushing myself to try to do my best just because I wanted it, and because everyone around you, you're looking at dailies, like, wow, this stuff is so good. Oh, take that scene from James Baxter, or Glenn or somebody. And wow, I'm inspired to do my best work. So that was very exciting about working in a group artist environment like that. Is not sure, and sometimes you feel intimidated, but I think everyone feels that at the beginning of a production. I felt completely intimidated when I started at Disney. I didn't realize they wanted me for Fantasia 2000. And the first project that I was on, I was 24 or something, and I was like, they're like, we want you to animate every Disney prince and princess and secondary character ever made to Pomp and Circumstance. That was kind of the original idea. And I was like, how do I get out of here? This is terrifying. They end up changing that idea, but I think being in those kind of pressure situations, you find that you can rise to it. We always pushed our students a little further than they thought they could do because we wanted them to have that experience going out there into a very challenging industry and knowing, okay, I'm going to be asked to do some tough stuff. They could look back and say, boy, on my thesis film, I was able to do more than I ever thought I could. And it doesn't make it easier that you have to do something else that they're asking you that seems impossible, but you at least reflect on that experience and say, okay, I know I did it before, and maybe I can do that again. Oh,
I'm not ignoring. I'm trying to type
yeah,
answers
I'm trying to
as
catch
quickly
up.
as possible. So please, Dave, continue, and I will chime in.
There was a question, it was, which one is harder, animation design or anime design? Well, I think they're.
That's what I was typing the answer to. Go for it, Dave.
I would just say, they're,
The rest.
they both have their challenges. Anime design is oftentimes more complex in terms of line quality and design, and that's what's really cool about it. But it also sometimes means that it may be more difficult to move that character with all of that line mileage, as we call it. So I think they both have their challenges. Just as designing a character for CG, I almost feel like, for CG, I want the modeler and the rigger to be the milk call of CG, because they're limiting my ability for that performance with the character. I want them to be so good at setting up that character that there's nothing technologically that's getting in my way of that performance. So, when I'm drawing a scene, I'm only limited by my own ability. So I'm like, it's really hard to draw that character from a top-down angle. But yeah, in CG, you would want someone to work. And I think design-wise, no matter what medium you're working from, designing character that can work dimensionally is really important. Even when you see really stylized animation, its ability to work in motion is really important. So, usually what I would find when we were working with student characters is that most of the difficulties would come, like they'd have an awesome profile drawing, but it would kind of lose dimension as the character turned in space. So we'd have to say, well, here's a way you can do that. Or I had a student we were working with recently who had this character that looked really great, particularly from the side angles, but the front angle was hard. I said, well, we're gonna have to cheat a little bit like this. Let's never show that character quite straight on. That does limit some of your abilities, but let's cheat it a little to the side so you can still get that design sensibility. It's always a struggle, particularly as you go more stylized, to get a character to turn in space. We've seen those characters, they have this awesome hairdo that doesn't really turn. So you go bang, and you have to get it over to the other side. But you can overcome those challenges and you can stylize them in interesting ways, but the ability to move that character in space, and to me, that really is understanding those basic forms that are there in space, spheres and all that. So you keep it dimensional as you move it. I've seen a lot of CG characters, again, they could look great from one angle. Oh, that profile isn't so great. And that's why you want to see a wonderful character that looks great from all angles. Like, I love characters like Vanellope from Wreck-It Ralph, or like really appealing characters that do work very nicely, or Zootopia. Those are some of my favorite CG films. Someone asked about brushes. Dave, why don't you handle another question while I pull up the brushes I was thinking about there, so I can guide them on that.
Find one. Okay. Do you typically shoot reference video for timing sequences for animation? How do you manage keeping character traits like nervousness or thinking moments from overshooting your frame limit for segments of drawing and still keeping the acting? I think what that boils down to is talking to the directors and finding out how the character fits into the scene, who the character is, and what needs to be communicated in the scene. Then in any professional situation, you're given a certain amount of time to do it. You can't just open up a film, because there's a rhythm that the directors have, and how long the running time is, and how long you have to communicate this. And sometimes there's a real challenge to communicate what you need to communicate in the time you're given to communicate in. That said, then you start planning. You start thinking, okay, what can I do here? And you explore all the possibilities, either in very quick, rough sketches that you can then shoot and time, or in thumbnails. Then you go back to the directors and you talk to them again about what it is you're thinking and what it is you'd like to do, and they can kind of gently guide you. It's like, we like some of this and a little bit of that, and you can kind of piece it together. This is before you ever start animating. You don't want to start just animating. You want to start thinking and getting things planned out and getting exactly what the directors want. Then you can start doing the work of animating, knowing that you've solved a lot of the groundwork problems. If you just start animating, you can end up spending a lot of time doing very detailed, beautiful drawings that aren't doing what they need to do. And you end up having to do retake after retake after retake, and you become a slow animator. I believe in planning, talking, and communicating my ideas. And then sometimes you'll get all your ideas and you'll start to animate, and you'll realize you don't even have the time to do that. And then you have to do the terrible thing of throwing out good ideas because they just don't fit in the time frame you've got, and it's too much. But I never really throw them out. I just put them on a shelf so I can use them in other scenes later on. The important thing, though, is to know that timing is something that's very important in animation. You really have to, to me, shooting live action is important if you've got a very naturalistic, realistic character, like say Pocahontas or Cinderella or any one of a number of the princesses and whatnot and princes that have been in a lot of films. But ultimately, it's not about replicating life. It's about caricaturing it. And a lot of times animation timing is very different from live action timing. So you kind of take live action reference and you study it and you get every nuance that you can out of it. And then you just kind of put it away and do your own thing based on what you learned from the study of that. I hope that makes sense to you. I don't think it needs to be literally traced. I think when that happens, you get things like Gulliver from Fleischer's Gulliver's Travels, which is not a bad film when it was made, but Gulliver seems more, even though he's traced from a live actor, he seems less alive than the characters who weren't, like Gabby and the other characters in the film.
Gabby is supremely annoying. I agree with you.
Well, he is, but that's who he is. You know, he's consistently extremely annoying. Yeah, but the point is, it's not about doing it exactly like live action, or then you might as well just shoot the live action and use it. It's about getting what you can out of that, getting the believability out of that, and then going ahead and making it your own.
I guess I want to bounce off of what you said, Dave, in terms of thinking about your scene, and that's one thing that the original Disney animators really emphasized, that they're thinking about the scene before you started getting into it. I think there's a tendency, particularly I know myself, the temptation is I've got a rigged CG character in front of me. Let me just start playing with it and making it move, and that really leads to unconvincing animation. I think. All people say, oh, what's faster? Is it faster to do something, by pencil, or computers must be faster, right? Or, I think that well done animation, there isn't a speed advantage between necessarily CG or paper or a stop motion. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. The stop motion, when you're done with the scene, the performance itself is finished. You may be comping in backgrounds and compositing things in and there, but essentially the performance is hand-drawn animation. You're going to do the rough stage, and then you're going to, clean it up, maybe tie it down, and then clean it up, and then color it. So there are more stages to get it being complete. CG, you'll get the performance there. You still need to render it and all that. But the thinking part, you can't really reduce in any of those at the highest level of animation, because, you really need to consider who this character is, why they're going to move in a certain way. Am I moving in a way that's expressing how that character feels? So I don't think there's, any time saving advantage to all of them. And I would encourage everyone to give it that thought before you just decide, let me jump in. I think, unfortunately, what software allows us to do now is to make changes so easily to the timing that it sometimes short circuits our ability to really think about and visualize what this should be beforehand. And in other words, you can shoot some drawings and you can mess with the timing and see if that works. That's more trial and error. I think the early animators actually had an advantage that they would have to shoot something on film and wait for it to be processed and come back to see it as a pencil test, because it meant that your first pass, you really had to think about that. You had to pick up the drawings and roll them and really put everything into that first pass to make it as good as it could be, rather than saying, well, I'm going to fiddle with it after I get to it. And I think if you get in that mode where you're relying on, oh, I'm just going to play it back and change this and change that timing, you're not really animating anymore. You're just sort of manipulating. And the problem is that you may have a drawing that doesn't work. And you would be better to throw that out, but you get so attached to, I'm going to make this work through timing. You kind of waste a lot of your time in that sense. I don't know if that makes sense. It's kind of counterintuitive. You think, oh, technology would make everything easier, but in a way, you still need that visualization time and that planning time as an animator.
I'm exhausted because there's so many good questions and there's just not enough time to do this. And unfortunately, we have another presentation that we have to do right after this for a high school that teaches animation, which should be very interesting as well. But I don't want to give anybody short shrift here because, like I said, there's so many good questions, and I feel badly that I can't get to all of them right now. But please, if you can, go to our website. There is a link to an email that will go right to us, info@cat-animation.com.
Yeah,
ask the questions and we will get to them as quickly as we can. We really want to be of help and support to people who really want to get into this, and that's our goal. And so doing this is great. We love it, and we really appreciate the opportunity to do it. But it's just so impossible to answer everybody, and everybody deserves, a thoughtful answer. So if you can please go to the website, look around, find the link, and send it to us. That's great. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or on Facebook also. I'm there frequently.
You want to drop your social contacts in the chat there, Dave, so people can reach out to you?
Yes, I can do that.
Do that. I did want to address one question before we do wrap it up, because there were some people said, well, I feel like, is it too late for me to start? And someone else said, well, I don't know if how do I know if this is something I want to do? Well, I think no, there's no point where you can say it's too late to do this. If you have the passion, you're going to make it happen. Again, that's what you bring to the table. And I'm confident if you persevere that you will be able to make these opportunities happen. How do you know whether you're going to like it? Short of just trying it out yourself, like getting Rough Animator or something, playing around with it, you could take a more introductory class. We do offer an intro to animation class that doesn't require any prior animation experience, or if you want to take one of our other instructors classes, like Larissa teaches a intro to illustration class, which touches along a lot of these areas of design and character and all that, and you can kind of find what you want in there and see if that is your passion. I personally think it's never a waste to take, for no matter what you want. If you want to be a board artist, if you want to be a character designer, I think it's never a waste to take an introductory animation class, because that's going to inform everything that you do. If you learn to animate well, or understand the process of animation, you're going to make stronger boards. If you, struggle with drawing a character from all these different angles, you're going to be a better character designer. So that time spent is really never wasted, because again, it can help you with so many other areas that are related to animation. All right, yeah, we've got to wrap up our time here, but thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions. It's really been fun being with you and answering these. If we haven't gotten to anything, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you further. And I encourage you all to pursue your passion, because this is a lot of work. It's a very challenging industry, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Seeing your scenes come to life, or your stories come to the screen, your designs is really what it really makes it all worth it.
And we're here to help you if that's what you feel you need. And that's a wrap.
All right. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure. It was really great. Really great.
We're always excited to talk about what we do. That's just why we're teaching. We love this. We love seeing the light turn on with students. It's great.
And we're done.